Well, guys, I'm excited to be here with you too because the reason we're here is because the Movement Ready Church book is out. Y'all been working on this for a while, and really, I've lived it with you. So it's exciting for me to be able to be a part of this conversation. Thanks for letting me be a part of it. But really, y'all have been busy for 5 years. But really, the book has been in process for many years. Robby, tell us kind of how the Movement Ready Church book came to be.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've probably been writing this book for 20 years, maybe, Vic in Baton Rouge and me in Chattanooga, and then here at Long Hollow. So when I got to Long Hollow, I'll just start back 10 years ago, a little over 10 years ago. I like to say I got the biggest wake-up call of my life when I thought what had worked in Chattanooga, you know, effectively in disciple making. And then it worked the same way in Morgan City, Louisiana, at a smaller church perfectly, just making disciples and replicating. I thought, surely it'll work here at Long House. Surely they're ready for discipleship and making disciples. And again, I tell people it's a wake up call because I know how to grow discipleship groups by a third. I know how to cut them down by a third. No, the reality was Long Hollow, for those who are unfamiliar, our church when I got here was highly evangelistic. You were here. We had seen amazing growth year over year. Our church was seeing people baptized. I remember in the interview process, they asked me, what is it like coming into a church at that time 3 times larger than my previous church that I was at? And they said a church that baptized over 1,000 in 2013 and right under 1,000 in 2014. I never heard of churches that had done that. I mean, I'd heard of them, but I never knew any of them. And I was overwhelmed. I sat back with the search committee. I was like, wow, praise God. And then I asked them a question. And the question was, what did you do with the people? And thankfully, they were honest. They looked around, and I remember one of them spoke up and said, well, that's why we're talking to you. Because we know our back door basically is as big as our front door. Now, here's what I've learned. That's not an indictment against Long Hollow before I got here. Most churches, most pastors who are watching would resonate with that and say, that's us. We have the same thing going on. And so I just assumed they were ready for disciple making. So I came here with my spiritual briefcase of disciple making tools, and I unloaded them and started teaching about how you make disciples. This is what it looks like. This is how you do it. This is how long you last. This is who goes in the group. This is what you study. This is how big the group is. And the first year they did it because it was a novelty. I was the new pastor, and I think we had like 700, 5, 6, 700 get in the first year. And then the next year that number over doubled to 12. I think it was 1,500. We'd hit year 2. It was unbelievable. And I started extrapolating the numbers, doing the math in my head. Okay, 1,500, 3,000 next year. And after year 2, you remember I said, let's audit the groups. Let's just make sure we're making disciples. And this was the wake-up call. I realized we weren't actually making disciples. We had people meeting on Sunday night for NFL football over pizza and wrapping discipleship around it. And so when we got involved, you remember this, you're part of that team. I tell people I grew the groups from 1,500 to back down to 500. I'm really good at that. But again, that taught me a valuable lesson. You can't just cookie cut disciple making for every church. And Vic has helped immensely with this when he came on staff and on our team. Vic just said, hey, we need to come up with a contextual plan that is tailor suited for each individual church, because churches are different. Now, there's a lot of things that are synonymous and contextual for church, but church in Middle Tennessee is different than church in Western California or Southern California, and even in Florida or even in Texas or the East Coast. And so I say that was the wake-up call for me, because God began to redefine what discipleship was. So when the revival happened in 2020 and then 21 and now beyond, we had already put in an operating system. Think of it like a computer. We put in an operating system that was able to accept the app of Revival, so that when we downloaded it to the system, we already had an infrastructure to disciple the people. We didn't disciple all 1,600 that came forward for baptism in those first 8 months of the revival, but we tried. And you remember this, we tried everything we could. And I think, Julie, in hindsight, that's one of the reasons, I think, not playing God, but one of the reasons God entrusted us with the revival, because he trusted us enough that we were going to try to disciple the people that came to faith.
Yeah. Yeah, those were some hard, times and some hard lessons learned along the way. However, Vic, you were running the playbook
Yeah.
in Baton Rouge, and when you got to Long Hollow, it was different here and harder here. So what is the Movement Ready Church?
Yeah, I think that was one of the principles. There were things that were working in Baton Rouge that were always like, "How are y'all doing that?" And then there were things that were happening here that I was like, "Man, we couldn't figure that out." There was stuff that was working at Long Hollow, but there was stuff that wasn't working for other churches. And so the question just kind of became, why isn't it working here? And what does it take for disciple making to actually take off? And so that really birthed what became the Movement Ready framework. And it was just, what are the three essential elements for disciple making? And I think what was wild is this really started to form in the revival years. And like there was what Robby was learning and what we were seeing happen as God was doing something powerfully in him and through Long Hollow, as well as we were learning, okay, how do we not just talk about strategy, but we actually talk about vision and culture? And as we started to look at it, the Movement Ready framework, the three essential elements, they became spiritual renewal, disciple making culture, and organizational clarity. And these, as we looked, we said every church, whether it's Texas, Florida, Tennessee, whether it's a rural church, urban, megachurch, whatever it may be, those three elements must be there. There has to be this spiritual renewal, which is this desperation in the leadership for more of God. I think that's so much of what I learned from you, Robby, and some of my biggest learnings while I was here was that desperation for more of God, that relationship and intimacy with God in ministry flowing out of that. Second was disciple making culture. I think that's what we'd always been doing. I mean, Replicate started in 2008. It's always been around disciple making. And so having that culture. And then the third, and this is where we kind of went back and said, we've got to do better about this at Long Hollow, is organizational clarity. And it was, how do we get the language, how do we get our, the clarity in our organization beyond just what's our strategy? Don't just get in Diggers, but what's our vision? Why does it matter in the first place? Where's God taking us? And so those three elements, as we kind of learned, they all kind of happened over probably 3 or 4 years and started to see it carry over in other churches. But that became what we now talk about is that movement
Well, and
ready
here's the
framework.
thing too, Vic, and I would just say, thinking now, I had always had a disciple making conviction.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, and we always say that, and you've been at events we've done and then led them, and you say this for years. You have to, disciple making cannot be a ministry of the church. I mean, in the church, it has to be the ministry of the church.
Yeah.
And you know this, Julie. And now my team at Long Hollow, every one of us, and you know this too, because you're part of it. Everybody bleeds, you cut us, we bleed, the Bible and discipleship here in a sense. So we were always passionate. You were passionate there. What I needed help with was two things, and we learned one came through the revival and one came through Vick's help. Vick is a master of this, and I can't say enough about him, but his gift is scaling and process and systematizing, because if it works here, it may not work everywhere, but there are you can principalize the discipleship process. So, I mean, I've written on discipleship before. I wrote books on it. What's different about this book and what I love about this resource, why write another book? I've already written book. This one's different, and here's why. This one's different in that we help you contextualize it to your personal church context, and not just, hey, it works here, do X, Y, and Z. So what you've heard Vic say already was there are three spheres. Disciple make conviction, we've always had that. Organizational clarity is what he brought to the table. And then our team thinking, how do we scale this? But what the revival brought was spiritual renewal. And you know this, a lot of pastors have the desire and the passion to make disciples, but they don't have the grit and the backbone to stick with it. What do you do when your deacon leader says, what are you talking about? You want to sit in a room and read scripture and sing songs? No, we need to be reaching people. And you're like, oh, wow. Or we ain't doing all that disciple making stuff. We got to do a bit. What do you do then? Or your people say, wait a minute, you want me to be what do you do then? Most guys jump ship. So what we realize, you have to have three spheres. And in the book, we talk about these three spheres. It's a Venn diagram. And share with how it works. You need to have, obviously, declaration to the many, which is the process, and you need to have dedication to the few. But tell them the other one, which is interesting. Tell them about
I
this year.
think that's what's so funny. I think that's been one of the greatest gifts of being able to write this, and then obviously us all live it together. I think I am quick to go to organizational clarity and planning and what is the language that we give for people and I can get all into that. But what I watched you do over the revival in those few years is you would get before the Lord. There was this personal revival that you experienced first, and then you would call us in staff meetings to silence and solitude, to pursuing the Lord, to and I saw, I think, more than ever, just this desperation in you and a call for us to desperately pursue God. And that became really what I think is the superpower of what we do is that strategic planning is great. But at the end of the day, what starts a movement is spiritual renewal. You know, you with the line you say, every movement starts by not moving. And I think watching and living you personally go through a season of revival and then seeing how that is what brought to life our church, and then that is what's helped sustain us. That was this huge aha for me as I'm thinking planning. I'm like, holy cow, I'm missing it. This planning starts in prayer, which is aha.
Right, right,
I
right.
know that intellectually. I think I experienced that and began to believe that personally. And so that really has been, I think, the power of working on this together and really what we get to see now happen in other churches. Hey, church leader, I want to take just a moment and tell you about an exciting opportunity for you. Most churches have a passion for multiplication. They just don't know how to do it. Pastors have this disciple-making burden, but their vision and strategy for it just aren't working. After 17 years and working with over 4,000 churches, our team has found many ways to help the church better make disciples. We call this our Movement Ready Church process. It helps your church create a disciple-making culture, vision, and strategy that fits your unique context. It fits your church size, your community, your leadership style. If you want more information about our Movement Ready Church process, you can grab the book, Movement Ready Church, at any place that books are sold. Also, you can join us for any of our Movement Ready trainings. We host one-day trainings all across the country, and we have a virtual on-demand course that you can go through as a team. So if you're ready to see multiplication take off at your church, just go ahead and grab the leader notes in this show, and you'll see all the links to what I've mentioned and more. Now, let's get back to the episode.
It's really fun from my perspective because
You've seen a lot.
I've seen a lot. And when Vick first got here, he did some drawing on board. Matter of fact, that was kind of the joke.
He's a
wasn't it,
whiteboard
Vick?
ninja,
Yes, a
we like to say,
whiteboard with
yeah.
his markers, and it does it better than anybody I know, actually. But Robby, what you said a few minutes ago, just the renewal part, watching God move in our church, and that being the basis of it, because in any church, you can pray and you can do all the things right, but until God moves, then it's all for naught.
Right.
And so we did experience that here in 2020. And tell us a little bit about that spiritual renewal that took place here. And really, the foundation was laid, as you said a little bit ago, but boy, has God really blown us away in these last few years.
Yeah. I mean, my passion for discipleship hasn't changed. Disciple making hasn't changed. But I think the person leading the disciple making initiative has changed. I remember when D.L. Moody had this encounter with the Lord, and prior, people don't know, but Moody, prior to him being this big revivalist, he was trying to preach and teach with Ira Sankey. They'd lead worship, but it wasn't powerful. It wasn't spirit led. He would say this in his journal. And two ladies came up to him and said, "Mr. Moody, we're praying for you to have an encounter with the Holy Spirit of God." And that makes some people nervous. And we're not talking about falling down, running around, and speaking to, I'm not saying I'm a cessationist with that, but that's not what they prayed for. They prayed for him to have a real, tangible, palpable encounter with the Holy Spirit of God, something that happened to me on the porch. And they said, "We're going to pray for you." And it happened. When he was walking down the street one day, and he was overwhelmed by the power of God, he knocked on some random door. I think he was in Boston or New York, and they let him in, and he dealt with God in there. When he left, he wasn't the same. And so he would preach, and people noticed there's something different about this. And one day he was preaching, Vic, it was crazy. Many people responded, and people surrendered their life to Christ. And a friend who knew him from before stopped him after the service and said, Mr. Moody, that was amazing. I've never heard a message like that before. I've never heard you preach like that. And Moody said, no, the message is the same, but the man is not. It's a different man. And I think that's what happened to me. You know, we joke at Long Hollow, and I've said this before, but after COVID and after the porch, 10 months of sitting in silence and solitude, and we talk about this in the book, there were 5 shifts, Julie. Vick helped me. Vick's real good at reverse engineering. So he lived it. And another thing about this book, which I love how God put it together, is it was birthed out of experience. It's not, I'm not against guys who write from ivory towers and tell people how to live but never experience. But this is a book that we lived and we practiced. And not only that, we exported to hundreds and hundreds of churches that were part of our network, and they experienced it too. So it's not just isolated. But the thing about the encounter with God was, I tell the church, after the revival, they got a new pastor. I received a new church, and nobody had to leave.
Yeah.
And none of us had to leave.
Yeah.
And it was just different. And so I would say what happened for me was, for years and years, I realized I did not have an interior life to sustain the outer attacks of ministry. Okay. Watchman, he calls it the inner man, the spiritual man. I didn't have the inner life. I didn't have I knew discipleship and I read my Bible, but I needed to have this encounter with the Lord. Well, I need to have a word from the Lord. I mean, that's most pastors, most leaders. They're worried about the words of man. They're worried about social media comments. They're worried about likes and dislikes and what everybody else said. People that don't care and people that don't know them rule their lives and take up way too much rent in their mind. And for me, and I was like that, I was a people pleaser. I wanted to do, but the Lord began to show me, no, you get a word from me and you stand on that word and you watch what I do. And that's really what, that porch season, 10 months, was just really me bending my ear, Julie, to tune into the accent of the Holy Spirit. I went out there out of desperation. I was burning out, didn't really know it, but burning out. I started to sit in silence and solitude. And I didn't know what that was, but I was desperate enough to try it. And then it became 30 minutes a night, an hour a night, hour and a half very quickly. And I learned it wasn't about me getting something from God. A lot of people, this will resonate with you, because for me, God's relationship was a lot of transactional, was transactional in nature. God, if I do this, do that. God, I read my Bible today. Would you bless me? Or, man, I shared my faith today. And we don't want to get on that spiritual treadmill of performance, but we live on it a lot. And, but the Lord began to show me, no, silence and solitude is very different, because most of the time you get nothing tangibly from me. But what you get is beyond anything tangibly you can expect. I remember going in one night, Lord, what was that? I got nothing from you. I sat on here an hour and a half. What was that? And you heard me tell the story. The Holy Spirit just spoke to me, spoke to my heart and said, no, you didn't get nothing. You got everything.
That's good.
Because you got me and I got you. And that's when I realized I was really good at trying to tell God how to do his job better. I could tell God, like, God, if you just rubber stamp this agenda list, everything will go great for me. I was really good at that. I was really good at trying to get my agenda into heaven. I was really bad at God getting his agenda through me on earth, where I live, work, and play. And so I began to listen more. And I would say, if you're watching and listening, that really speaks to you. Why? Because a lot of what we do in life is from other people's opinions. When was the last time you got a word from God? Or better yet, when was the last time you tried? I remember sharing, before I finish this, but I remember sharing, I was at a church planning, Robert and I were at a church planning event, West Coast, and it was Southern Baptist Church Planners. And I was speaking to them about the revival, this story. And I was just talking about this, how I sat with the Lord and I heard the voice of God eventually say to me, spontaneous baptism. We had this amazing revival of baptism. And I heard the word spontaneous baptism. And I kept using terminology like that. And I felt like the Lord say to me, I felt like the Lord speak to me. Well, at the end of the message, you can imagine not everybody was used to that language. And so one pastor, he was younger, probably in his late 20s, stood in line. And I could tell he was a little agitated. And he walked up to the front and I said, hey, man, how you doing? What's your name? He told me his name. And he said, I don't agree with anything you just said. I was like, wow, tell me what you really think. I said, what part? He said, all of it. I said, oh, really? He said, I don't think God speaks that way. He said, you keep saying, I heard from God or God said, and hear what I'm saying. I'm not saying I have a direct line to heaven and I'm somebody special and God's speaking. I'm talking about feelings and leadings and checks in my spirit and people and in encounters. That's what I'm talking about. But I'm looking for it. God's speaking all the time. I'm looking for it, right? And so he said, I don't think God speaks that way. And I said, brother, and hear my heart, I was not mad at him. I wasn't critical of him. I wasn't trying to put him down. I really genuinely was concerned. And I said to him, I'm not upset with that at all because I used to be you.
Yeah.
And I said, here's what I mean. A few years ago, before I had this encounter with the Lord, after 10 months of sitting with him in silence and solitude for 10 months, I said, I was very critical of anything that didn't happen to me. And a lot of pastors watching and listening would say the same. We live by what's called an autobiographical ministry, meaning if it doesn't happen to me, it can't be. Surely it can't happen. It didn't happen to me. But we serve a God who could do whatever he wants, when he wants, how he wants, without my approval or opinion. So I said to him, I said, so I'm not mad at you because I was actually you 4 or 5 years ago. So I'm not going to be critical. I said, but brother, let me ask you a question. And I'm not trying to be cute, but I'm really sincere. When was the last time you set out to spend 10 months sitting on the porch of your house for 2 hours a night to try to hear the voice of God? I said, better yet, what about 10 days or 10 hours or better yet, 10 minutes? He didn't say anything other than, I get it. Thank you. And he walked away. That's it. And I wasn't trying to be mean to him or critical. I was just basically saying it's very easy to throw stones at something that hasn't happened to you. But I heard somebody tell me one time, there's nothing more powerful than telling a story that you don't fully understand.
Yeah.
And we don't fully understand the revival, but what we did was, because of our passion for making disciples and because of our spiritual renewal with going back to the Lord to fill our tank and speak in our life and sit in silence and having unhurried, quiet times with God, then we were able to put on the system of organizational clarity, which takes the desperation in the one or me and makes it a declaration to the many. And so that's the beauty of what Vick brought to the table.
Well, and I think that was like, I think people see the revival. And so like, especially that moment, December 20th of 2020, when like 100 people, spontaneous baptism and, you know, there was, I guess, 8 months. I forget.
Around 1,600, 8 months. Yeah.
1,600 salvations, 8 months. I think there's this like revival that happened and people from afar, like that's what grabs your attention. What I think people miss, and I think is in Movement Ready, we talk about is like, man, the first 5 to 10 years was tough. And like, it was full of detours, setbacks, discouragements. Your time on the porch, I think you said it well. The one big thing I saw in you was a desperation. Like you were burnt out, you were done. You're like, man, I need more of God. And then as you were just desperately seeking him, it spread. Like I remember coming on staff and like in our staff meetings, and now I'm doing silence and solitude and I'm praying. And like we're now as a team desperately pursuing God. And so whenever December 2020 hits, that move, what it feels like the movement starting, well, God's been building it and forming it for years. And I think the same thing could be said, like the early church of Acts, like Acts 2 is not the start of the early church movement.
Yeah, that's good.
It actually was when Jesus took 12 fishermen and began to invest in them for 3.5 years and goes through the cross and resurrection. Like there was a season of readiness before a season of movement. And I think we got to live that together in a powerful way. And it was tough. And then when 2020 hits, I think people are like, wow, isn't that amazing? All that's happened, revival and God sent. It's like, man, there was a lot that it took to get here. You know, there was and we didn't, you can't manufacture revival, but I think, how do you say you can stack the wood? I think that idea, like we can't send the fire revival. We can be ready.
Well, but you said it best. Everybody wants the revival of Acts. They don't want the discipleship of Jesus.
Yeah,
right? Like
that's
that.
good.
So the discipleship of Jesus leads to Acts. And think about, I mean, just Jesus's life. Jesus knew that he could impact the world, not by just big preaching events. He only preached rarely to big crowds. He knew he would change the world by investing in a few. Yeah. And that's what we realize. It's a both and, right? It's a both and. We prepare the table and anticipate, John Oprah says, you raise the sail of revival. You can't direct the wind. God does.
That's good.
So organizational clarity is raising the sail. Discipleship is the sail, and then God sends the spiritual. So it's kind of the, using that now.
That's good.
You know what a beautiful part of that is? I'm just thinking as y'all are talking is it also takes perseverance. And it would have been easy to give up in the middle of before we saw God beginning to do it. But you were faithful, both of you, to stay the course and do what God had called you to do. And so today, I think we reap that benefit, which is, it brings me tears just thinking about it, to think all that God was readying us for to get to here, which is really, really exciting.
Well, Julie, that's good you said that. You got me thinking that, I am convinced, and if Long Hollow came to me tomorrow and said, we just want you to preach, and that's it. No making disciples, no investing in guys, I would go. I'd go tomorrow. What are you talking about? You'd leave this preach? Of course I would, because discipleship is what I'm called to do as a Christian, not as a pastor, not as a Christian. Like we're called. Jesus's final words, we say it all the time, should be our first work. Okay. So for me, and me personally, I never tell you to do anything I'm not doing myself. There's no power in that. I can't tell you to go sit in the porch and hear from God if I'm not trying to hear from God. That's right. Pastors that get up and say, y'all need to be evangelizing, but they don't evangelize, or you need to be praying, but you don't pray. So think about Jesus's ministry, and this is what got me. This is why I'm so passionate about disciple making not being an option. It's not optional, it's the only option. Not only are the words of Jesus inspired, I was taught this in seminary and hermeneutics class and Bible, proclaiming the Bible. Not only are the words inspired, the message Jesus spoke, but the actual encounters are inspired. We agree with this. The fact that he goes to Jericho and he sees this blind man yelling, Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me, right before he's going to the cross. This man's giving his identity and who he is. That's not by accident. The fact that this woman just happens to be hanging around a well at noon in Samaria, it's not by happenstance. These are divine encounters. So what that means is not only are the words of Jesus sovereign, but the manner and the method and the means by which he did ministry is encountered. So if that's the case, which I think it is, then not only is the message of Jesus inspired, but the method he used was. And so what we say at Replicate is, you can't, as a pastor, leader, teacher, ministry leader, you can't expect to receive the blessing of the ministry of Jesus and divorce yourself from the method he used, which was making disciples. That's what he did. Jesus was on to something, like you said, and he knew it was more than just preaching to crowds and teaching. That's a part of it. It's more than life groups and Sunday school. We know that. It's a part of it. Some people listen and say, man, we've been making disciples for years. We do Sunday school. Okay, maybe, but that's a part of it. It's not preaching alone. There's a process for making disciples. Right. And I think you're right. That's what we saw. And I knew that early on. Boy, was it hard? Absolutely. Were we deterred along the way? Absolutely. Did we put it on the back shelf at times? Absolutely. But we always knew God would bring it back. And here we are, 10 and a half years later.
Which is crazy.
And we're seeing exponential
really
results. And not just numerical, but spiritual. I mean, last year alone, Vic, we had almost 7,000 people at Long Hollow self-identified. Julie, tell them this. Almost 7,000 self-identified as reading the Bible daily, and almost over like 1,200 families doing it as a family. That's the stuff I get excited.
But you're at like year 10, and I think that like you're now experiencing the power of multiplication, of like, man, disciples and they're discipling their homes or all this. But I think so many people, they want the impact of multiplication, but they don't want the pace of multiplication. Like the pace, like it's so much easier to go after addition and just attracting people to events. It's so much slower and harder to do the work of investing in disciple making, because it takes like seeing lives changed and grow in faith and let go of hurts, habits, and hangups, like all of those things. That's not a fast process, but it's ultimately what we're called to do, And so like, I love seeing now 10 years down the road, we're seeing multiplication, but boy, how many people give up in year 2 and 3 because it's not easy. It wasn't quick.
So here's funny. You like that. I never said this publicly, but I was looking back at my notes today. I want to write a book one day about revival called the mathematics of revival. And it's going to be 4 chapters, addition and subtraction. We know those, but people aren't prepared for multiplication and division.
No.
Yeah, think about this. Think about this. We've experienced them all. Division, people are like, I don't want that. And then they leave. Or multiplication, they grow exponentially. But then there's some who go out the back door. You know, we always say sometimes the best revival is the back door revival, with all due respect. To the people who don't like you, they leave, subtract,
Yeah.
but that's not always a bad thing.
Well, and
But you got to stay long enough to experience it.
Yeah, well, we say this early on, like, I don't lead with this because no one would want to hang out with me. This is not a great, like, get people excited. But like, what people don't tell you about getting clear on your vision is you lose good people in the process. Because so often when we don't have vision, people assume this is what we stand for. This is what we're about. Well, it's hard to believe, but when you come and say, we're about this and to making disciples, like people now they're like, wait, I didn't sign up for that. I thought it was this. I thought it was that. And I think some of the hardest conversations in ministry has been me watching people I love who I thought was on the same page with me leave whenever we got clear on what we're about.
That's the hardest part of ministry.
It is. I remember crying with people, like, I'm just like, why don't you see it the same way? Like, don't you see all that God's doing? And I think it's just, we say this a lot. Everybody has a heart for disciple making. The question is, do you have the grit for it?
Yeah.
That has been a 10-year run that has felt slow, division, subtraction. Like, I love
Well, here's
that.
another, just to confirm that. How many pastors ask me all the time, should I stay at my church? Should I go? And, the average church tenure, I think, is 3 years. I think it's still 3 years, 2.5 for student ministry, 3 years for a senior pastor. So the average tenure is every 3 years. And I get it. There are difficulties. Some church leaders don't accept you. But sometimes pastors run through their sermon catalog and they pick up and go somewhere else. I get that. Or there's a shiny object here or a bigger place here. I'm not against if God's leading you. But most of the people will leave when it gets tough. And I tell people, if I would have left year 2, 3, 4, 5, I would have missed the wave of revival coming at the end of year 4 into year 5. And so we'd never be sitting here today with this story. And so you nailed it. When you don't have a clear vision as a church, everybody has a vision. And one of the things you got to remember is whenever you have two visions, that's division.
Yeah.
Division is two visions competing simultaneously. Well, the larger the church, the more the visions you have. And you nailed it. Once the pastor gets clear about this is what we have sought the Lord on, you've seen this with consulting, and we're going to go here. People are like, wait a minute, that's not what I thought. Well, I don't know why you thought that. Well, I thought that because you didn't give me a vision. So really the onus is back on the pastor because they did. So you got to be okay with knowing everybody won't be on board, and that's okay.
Yeah, I think what's really fun about this is that it's a book that's rooted in experience. You have our story at Long Hollow, but you have like Robby as lead pastor. You have I've gotten to lead our ministry of Replicate, which has served 17 years now, over 4,000 churches, and so it's to be able to put something that's rooted in experience, and it's not just Long Hollow, but it's Baptist, Methodist, Presbyterian, rural, urban. The body of Christ. Yeah. Like it's all of those created this book. And I think what I hope it does for pastors, I think it's going to be words to a burden that they felt. I think there's so many pastors who are in ministry. Like the number one thing I love to hear back is, man, this is why I got back to ministry in the first place. This is why I got into ministry in the first place. What we are helping churches and pastors do is we're helping them create a vision and strategy to a burden that they feel. And what it does, like my favorite, I just left in Missouri. We finished a training, and like I love my whiteboarding. I love my tear sheets. But the spiritual renewal that happens through that is now why I do what I do. And this guy, he comes up to me, he goes, I love this. Like, this is going to be so good for our church. But more than that, how have we missed this? Yeah. This is what we should have been doing from the first place. This isn't us getting better. This is us getting back to what's right. And that right there, I hope that the book can put words to that burden, can give them a vision plan that helps them get back to why they got ministry in the first place.
Yeah, it's so exciting to see all that God is doing. And I just want to thank you both because you have stayed the course, you've kept the faith, and now look what God is doing. And I think this book is going to help so many be able to put that plan in place. And I would just encourage those who are listening to stay the course because it's worth it. It's like you said a few moments ago, what if I'd left before God began to do that? So it's really exciting. Thank you both. And you can buy this book wherever you purchase books anywhere, huh?
Yeah, you can get it anywhere where books are sold, as well as we are doing one-day trainings around the books. We have movement ready days you can do in person across the country, or we do it on demand. And so whether you want to do it video, in person, but it's able to take your team through the content that's in the book. And then, hey, in a couple of weeks, it's going to be a Multiply conference as well. So we got a workshop, we got a book there. You know, tell them a little bit about Multiply conference.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a conference. We decided we got out of the conference business when COVID came, and we just felt like it was kind of hard to do it then, even before that. But we just feel like there's a space again for us to. People call us all the time at Long Hollow. What are y'all doing there? How are you making disciples? What does it look like in creative? What does it look like in prison ministry? What does it look like with recovery ministry, discipleship, life group? So what we're doing is just popping the hood in a sense, or pulling back the curtain. We've invited some select disciple making guys in our network who are leaders in making disciples at their church. We have some really cool guys this year. Bill Hull, one of my mentors. We have David Platt, another mentor. Vance Pittman, Candy, myself, Vick. We have our team. Julie, you'll be there speaking. So we have, and the rest of our team. So when you come to this conference, you're actually going to learn from practitioners, not just philosophers and theologians and professors. And so really excited about it. And if you're hearing this and the conference is already done, we're going to do it next year.
That's right.
So
That's right.
you come in 27.
Yeah,
So
that's exactly
at
right.
Long Hollow.
That's right.
Well, thank y'all. We're excited about what God's going to do and how he's going to use this.